Platformers have had a long, storied history practically since gaming began. Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 1 have birthed some of the most formative 3D experiences in the genre. The beginnings of individual blueprints they would continue to hone from the late 90s into present day. It's no secret that Mario 64 was the first true showcase of what you could do with platforming in a 3D space. After all, Mario is essentially the king of the traditional platformer. Nintendo has yet to misstep with the mainline 3D Mario game, and their influence lies everywhere. But on one of Nintendo's rival platforms, a different brand of platformers were in development. On PlayStation 1, Sony had Crash and Spyro as their main contenders in the space, which were no slouch. The first Crash sold 6 million and Spyro 5, but Mario 64 reached over double their combination at 12 million. Nintendo was in a league of their own. The 6th generation of consoles is where their paths started to diverge even further in the genre. Mascot platformers were coming out at a much more frequent pace. Household names were being formed by the number. On December 3rd, 2001, Naughty Dog was first up to bat, introducing us to Jak and Daxter, which was quite the quality leap from the likes of Crash Bandicoot, which had fulfilled its trilogy only 3 years prior. It featured a seamless world with all of its levels interconnected and one of the first attempts at meaningful storytelling. Jak followed Mario in being a largely silent protagonist outside of some well-timed grunts, with Daxter doing the heavy lifting in the VA department. On September 3rd, 2002, Suckerpunch debuted Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, starring a raccoon that is a thief. Sly Cooper, however, had a voice and a much different style of gameplay. While simple in practice, sneaking around the rooftops, collecting bottles, and pickpocketing the enemy was something that worked well to differentiate Sly from others. Having two other protagonists alongside him communicating mostly via Star Fox-esque radio calls made for well-timed banter. And of course, Sly Cooper's ever-changing back and forth with Carmelita Fox.
You think? This pistol packs a paralyzing punch. You ought to try it. Might snap you out of your crime spree.
And give up our little rendezvous?
But on November 4th, 2002, Insomniac Games came out swinging to complete the trifecta of PlayStation 2 mascot platformers with Ratchet and Clank. Unlike Jak and Daxter and Sly Cooper, Ratchet and Clank was a shooter while still very much being a platformer. It thrived. It still retained the collectathon elements you would come to expect from platformers of this era, but it had much more fleshed out gameplay than its counterparts. Ratchet and Clank, like Jak and Sly, were able to double jump, melee attack, and just generally have creative movement. But Clank was also being used as an important instrument to the gameplay rather than just being stuck on Ratchet's back. In addition to your standard jumps, you are able to achieve much more creativity and movement as you unlock Clank's different maneuvers, which as a result makes the level design have to be more creative to accommodate it. Our protagonist is also in a much different place at the start. Ratchet wasn't exactly the most likable character in the beginning of the first game. There was plenty of character development to go through. Ratchet's developing a relationship with Clank was different from what we were seeing elsewhere in the genre. It tackled much more interesting themes than its first entry, and Ratchet and Clank always had that edge to it from the beginning. It really shined as an everybody at any age can find something to love here kind of project, resembling much of what goes on in the animated film industry to this day. But layering guns on top of what was already acceptable gameplay in Jak and Sly's first outing makes Ratchet and Clank a standout title. It had 14 weapons outside of your standard Omni Wrench, with a lot of them not even being guns. The moment-to-moment stays dynamic because of the different progression of the weapons and their individuality. As you finish maxing out weapons, you're always unlocking new ones to swap them out for, and the gameplay is always feeling fresh as a result. Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, and Ratchet and Clank were without a doubt three faces that led the progression of the genre on PlayStation 2. All three of them landed well-received trilogies across individual 3-year periods, however, only one of them went on to receive new games. But why? It isn't entirely based on performance or fanfare. Jak and Daxter's second and third games did well, but they suffered from a bit of an identity crisis. They made the switch to gun combat, but they did it in a very unconventional way. It worked. But outside of that, they felt like testing grounds for a lot of new gameplay mechanics Naughty Dog wanted to try out. It's surprising how well it worked, all things considered. Outside of this, Naughty Dog was working into becoming a leader in a different type of game. It was simply time to move on for a while. Suckerpunch had similar plans. Sly 2 and 3, however, took a much different approach. It wasn't broken and they didn't fix it. The Sly games got much bigger in scope and really expanded what currently worked in the first game, including the ability to play as Sly's companions Bentley and Murray. Both were very well realized games that again had great critical receptions, but Sly's sales didn't quite reach Jak's numbers and most definitely didn't reach Ratchet and Clank's long term. Much like Naughty Dog, Insomniac had plans to move on to bigger challenges. While Insomniac did decide to also move into a different genre entirely with Resistance Fall of Man, it wasn't exclusively what they moved into as a company. Since the conclusion of Ratchet and Clank's first trilogy on the PlayStation 2, there would have been 6 mainline Ratchet titles: Deadlocked, the Future Trilogy, Into the Nexus, and most recently Rift Apart. Ratchet and Clank have mostly thrived among the games that come out around them year after year, and we are now 3 console generations past their inception. So why did Ratchet not only stick around this entire time, but also not fall out of the conversation? The games have been in a position since day one of being able to constantly innovate with each new entry. When your gameplay is primarily based around sci-fi weaponry and tech that isn't based in realism, it can always be whatever it wants. It allows for some of the best gameplay innovation in the industry. It's not to say that Jak or Sly can't find their way, there's always a way, but Ratchet and Clank have placed the groundwork for this for decades now. Insomniac didn't limit themselves with just gunplay. There are always a number of weapons included that don't get shot. If you set yourself up to have weapons that by design are from the ground up original ideas, then when do you run out of places to go? You simply don't. When watching the early gameplay demonstrations of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, I questioned just how much further they could take it. Rift Apart looked to be a culmination of everything they had done right, fine-tuned to its best. At the time, I believed if they were to make another Ratchet game post Rift Apart, that would need to be many years later because it felt like it was about to peak as a series, and post finishing the game, I couldn't have been more wrong. Ratchet's new movement makes the moment-to-moment gameplay as stimulating as it has ever been. Something that seems as small as pulling yourself through rifts to quickly navigate the battlefield changed everything. It works so effortlessly as a quick mode of transportation, an elevation to the platforming options, or even a dodge if you need to get out of the way in a pinch. The newly added wall run and the new phase dash make for so much variety in how you want to tackle any situation. Speeding around on the hover boots, doing jumps and flips while firing off multiple weapons is the best movement I've experienced in a modern platformer. It's hard to imagine a Ratchet game coming out without these new additions going forward. The story being told in Rift Apart has so many angles to uncover. You would think after 9 mainline games the hero saga might get tired, but the game leans into what that means for their characters from the beginning. Ratchet's indecision about using the Dimensionator to try and find other Lombaxes is an interesting arc, but most notably the story themes revolving around what it means to be broken and how it defines you as a person is wonderful from multiple perspectives. Outside of the obvious one being Clank, there are a couple characters struggling with learning to feel comfortable not being alone. Rivet's inclusion, in addition to everything that was done with Ratchet and Clank as characters, makes this series feel new again. It would have been so easy to mess up Rivet. On a gameplay level, having Ratchet and Rivet share an inventory via the weapons you purchase making sense in lore worked so well on an execution level. Jennifer Hale's voice work lifts up an excellently written character. It's ideas and execution like this that hold interest, and Insomniac could have just made another Ratchet and Clank focused game, but they chose to introduce a character that creates a million more questions, while simultaneously still giving Ratchet and Clank their flowers. Once parts of Rivet's past are revealed towards the end of the journey is when you begin to wonder where exactly you can take Ratchet and Clank from here. Rivet is a character that felt like she had been a part of the series for much longer than 10 to 12 hours. It's Rift Apart's conclusion that cements the staying power of this series. What's so impressive about Rift Apart is that the ending feels like the beginning. It doesn't feel definitive, it leaves you more full of wonder. You're left with parallel characters of Ratchet and Clank that are very much their own distinctive characters, offering something completely different. And today in 2022, I feel like I'm waiting for the second game in a brand new series again. All these years later, Ratchet and Clank never fell out of the conversation. They created it.